Welcome, early American literature friends. This video is a discussion of, hopefully a short guide to Nathaniel Hawthorne and to the story Young Goodman Brown. I'll talk just for a second about Hawthorne, just to give you some context for this story. You see this picture of him. This is the picture. This picture, and then there's a lower picture. You always see these two pictures of him. You either see one or the other. There's the younger, the famous picture of him when he's young. Of course, this the famous picture of him when he's older. In the 1860s, just a few years before he died. He was born in 1804. He dies in 1864, right before the end of the Civil War. He is born in Salem, Massachusetts, and on the Hawthorne side of his family was an important family in the area and in Massachusetts, and especially in Salem. One of his ancestors had been involved in the Salem witch trials. And this is an idea that he comes back to over and over again in his famous books. His most famous novel is, of course, The Scarlet Letter. But over and over again, he comes back to Puritan culture in his sense of the hypocrisy of Puritan culture. That the Puritans, while they claimed to be godly, they were looking for the devil around every corner, and they believed in original sin, that man was sort of dirty and sinful from birth because of Adam and the Garden of Eden and the sort of fall of man. And so you have this sense that he believed that as much as they presented themselves as godly people, at the same time, their sort of hyper focus on the devil and sin and evil was at odds with their notion of being good and the sort of goodness of people, that they were striving for the goodness of people but always looking for the evil, and that they spent too much energy looking for the evil instead of focusing on and trying to engage with and simply be a part of the good and the sort of Christian goodness and good works. And so you have him, he is particularly interested in their sort of hypocrisy embodied by the Salem witch trials, their sort of like hyper fascination with the evil and the darkness and with sin, despite claiming to be focused in and hyper interested in goodness and salvation and these sort of Christian values. You get that in Young Goodman Brown. You of course get it in the Scarlet Letter, if you're familiar with that, his most famous novel. Young Goodman Brown is published. Hawthorne goes to Bowdoin College. He starts in 1821. He publishes this book called Twice Told Tales. I'm going to scroll down to his famous books, if I can get down here really quickly. Here we go. Yeah. The pieces that he is famous for, he publishes Twice Told Tales in 1837. That's the book that sort of makes him as a literary writer. People are like, oh, this is good work. I wonder what else this guy might do. Mosses from an Old Manse comes out in 1846. That's another book of short stories. This is where we get most of his famous short stories are from these first two books of stories, including Young Goodman Brown. It is The Scarlet Letter is published then 4 years after Mosses from an Old Manse. That really makes his reputation. It takes him from this sort of interesting New England writer into like a celebrity who is recognized, into a celebrity writer who is recognized both in the United States and in England. He published the other books that he is famous for, The House of Seven Gables and The Blithedale Romance. Both of those are books. The Scarlet Letter, House of Seven Gables, and The Blithedale Romance come out in 1850, 1851, 1852. Those are the books that really make him and make his reputation. He writes other books. He had written a novel before these in the 1820s that he was sort of embarrassed by. But those are the things that make his reputation. The Scarlet Letter, and then those next two novels, and then the two books of stories, Twice Told Tales and Mosses from an Old Manse. Young Goodman Brown comes from those 1830s stories, and I have it on the syllabus as our representation of Hawthorne's work because, like I said, you get if you've never read The Scarlet Letter, or even if you have, you get a big dose of the ideas and themes and imagery that Hawthorne comes back to again and again. This sort of New England culture, and the New England culture of like being obsessed with goodness and good works, and this sort of puritanical pilgrim foundations, but also this sort of hypocrisy of that culture and the sort of like distrusting people and seeing the badness and darkness in people and focusing on the badness and darkness in people instead of the goodness, which for Hawthorne is, Young Goodman Brown is a satire of Puritan culture and things like the Salem witch trials. And if you understand the definition of satire, satire is not an attack on a single person or a single behavior. Satire is this sort of social critique, where what is being critiqued or made fun of or mocked, and you get that in Young Goodman Brown, is not a person. It's not Deacon Gookin or any of these people that he sort of name drops who are famous people from the period of the 1690s and the Salem witch trials. What he is satirizing here is puritanical church culture and the sort of like claim to be good and holier than everybody else, but this sort of obsession with sin and darkness. And if you notice, this story starts with this focus on darkness because this story takes place mostly, except for the last paragraph, over one night. And this story starts at sunset. Young Goodman Brown came forth at sunset into the streets of Salem. So right there in the first paragraph, he gives you, we're going into darkness, we're going into sunset, and we're in Salem, famous for the Salem witch trials, but we are immediately at the beginning of the story leaving Salem and going out into the darkness, going out into the woods. He put his head back after crossing the threshold. So he's like stepping out of the safety and security of home, going out into the streets and then out into the woods. And Faith, as the wife was aptly named, thrust her own pretty head into the street, letting the wind play with the pink ribbons of her cap. The pink ribbons give you this foreshadowing. The pink ribbons come back into the story later, because when Young Goodman Brown has sat down on the stump and is like, no, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to give in to the devil. Well, what gets him up off the stump and gets him running through the woods is he sees his wife's pink ribbons floating through the wind, and it sort of pushes him over the edge. So you get some foreshadowing there too. The other thing that's important there is obviously his wife is named Faith, and Hawthorne loves this sort of heavy symbolism, like the scarlet letter, the red A for adultery. Because Hawthorne belongs to the period of the literary movement known as the Romantics, one of the things that makes the Romantics is this sort of heavy symbolism, and Hawthorne is big into it. And so, of course, you've got a character in this story named Faith, and her name is symbolic of like being faithful, staying home, being good. So in this story, it has this symbolic meaning, while it's also just simply a person, because it's Young Goodman Brown's wife. And so over and over again in the story, Hawthorne plays with using that word, and Young Goodman Brown thinks about, oh, my faith is gone, he says at one point in one of the most important lines of the story. And you get that right from the beginning, because Faith asks him to stay home and is like, no, stay home, be good, stay faithful. Young Goodman Brown says, look, I gotta go do this errand. I'll be home by sunrise, and then I'll stay home the whole rest of my life. I'll be good from here on out. My journey, as thou callest it, forth and back again, must needs be done twixt now and sunrise. So he's like, I gotta do this. I'll be back by sunrise. And then there's some more foreshadowing. Poor little Faith, he thought he for his heart smote him. I'm going to jump over to the story here too. Poor little Faith, he thought, for his heart smote him. What a wretch am I to leave her on such an errand. She talks of dreams too. Methought as she spoke, there was trouble in her face, as if a dream had warned her what work is to be done tonight. The idea of dream, and if everything is a dream, comes back later in the story, because Young Goodman Brown like snaps out of this, wakes up in the woods, and is like, was that all a dream? Was it real? And the story is sort of never explicitly tells you if it was a dream or if it was real. What matters in this story when you get to the end is whether it was a dream or whether it was real. It was real enough that it affected him and sort of ruined his life. The end of the story is this sort of dystopian. Young Goodman Brown is ruined because he has lost his faith in everybody and lost his belief in everybody's goodness, and all he can see is the darkness and sin in everybody. So you get this sort of dystopian, nightmarish ending, because whether what happens on this night is a dream or a reality, it has the same. It's the same for Young Goodman Brown, because he's ruined, whether it was a dream or real. His perspective is ruined. His faith is gone. His faith is ruined. And so you get Young Goodman Brown with this excellent resolve for the future. Young Goodman Brown felt himself justified in making more haste on his present evil purpose. He had taken a dreary road, darkened by all the gloomiest trees, and so here he goes into the forest, here he goes into the wilderness, into the darkness. You go a couple of paragraphs, and he says, he passed a crook in the road, looking forward again, beheld the figure of a man in grave and decent attire, seated at the foot of an old tree. He arose at Goodman Brown's approach and walked onward, side by side with him. This is the important figure in the story. This is very clearly symbolically some supernatural demon, probably the devil in sort of Christian iconography. There is this supernatural hint. The story gives you this supernatural hint that none of us would know, but that everybody would have picked up on when they read this story. "You were late, Goodman Brown," said he. "The clock of the Old South was striking as I came through Boston." That's a full 15 minutes ago. Well, nobody could go from Boston to Salem in 15 minutes, especially in the 1800s. Like, nobody could get there that fast. So the suggestion here is this is some supernatural being that Goodman Brown is meeting the devil in the woods in the darkness. And he says, you get Hawthorne already playing with faith. "Faith kept me back a while." And so he clearly is meaning his wife, but he's also playing with my Christian faith and knowing that I shouldn't have been out here in the woods, that I shouldn't come out here in the woods and meet with you. He and the devil figure go walking through the woods. Hawthorne gives you this description of how the devil figure in the story sort of resembles young Goodman Brown, or more explicitly resembles his father. It's like a slightly older version of young Goodman Brown. Still, they might have been taken for father and son. You also get the devil figure is carrying a snake staff, which is this reference to the Old Testament, specific to the Hebrews in the Old Testament. And young Goodman Brown and the devil figure sort of talk and debate, and young Goodman Brown is like, "No, I shouldn't do it." He says at one point, let's see if we can scroll down to it. "Friend, I have scruples touching the matter thou wottest of. It is my purpose now to return to whence I came. I have scruples." And so young Goodman Brown is saying, "Look, I agreed to meet you. I met you in the woods. Now I'm going to turn around and go back because I've got morals, I've got ethics, I've got scruples. I'm going to turn around and go home." One of the things that the devil immediately gives Goodman Brown and gives you in the story is, young Goodman Brown says, "We have been a race of honest men and good Christians." And the devil figure immediately responds, "I have been well acquainted with your family, as with every one among the Puritans." Here's Hawthorne satirizing the Puritans. "And that's no trifle to say. I helped your grandfather when he lashed the Quaker woman so smartly, and it was I that brought your father a pitch pine knot kindled at my own hearth to set fire to an Indian village in King Philip's War." And what Hawthorne is satirizing here, he is saying that young Goodman Brown's father was involved in King Philip's War and doing all this violence and killing innocent Native Americans, and his grandfather was involved in whipping and punishing people of different religions, this sort of religious persecution, the same thing that the Pilgrims had originally come to this country to flee. And so again, you're getting this satire of Puritan culture and sort of puritanical belief that they are better than everyone else, even as they're acting out these sort of violent unchristian activities. Young Goodman Brown is like, I don't think I really believe this. "We are a people," he says, "we are a people of prayer and good works. Wickedness or not, I have a very general acquaintance here in New England," the devil says. And that is, again, Hawthorne sort of playing with the New England Puritans are like, we're the city on the hill, we're better than everybody else. And here's Hawthorne having the devil say, no, trust me, I know everybody around here, I'm good. And they're sort of going back and forth, and young Goodman Brown, and this sort of debate with the devil figure is interrupted finally by a woman coming down the road. Let's see if we can find it. As he spoke, he pointed his staff at a female figure on the path, in whom Goodman Brown recognized a very pious and exemplary dame who had taught him his catechism in his youth, was still his moral and spiritual advisor. So he sees this one that he knows and who has taught him his prayers, who was like his Sunday school teacher when he was a young child. So young Goodman Brown doesn't want to be seen with the devil. He jumps into the woods. The woman talks to the devil, and it is revealed that this woman is a witch Her name is Goody Cloyce. You see, then Goody Cloyce knows her old friend, observed the traveler, confronting her, leaning on his writhing stick. And Hawthorne plays with this image right down to the point that Goody Cloyce says someone has stolen her broomstick, or she would be riding her broomstick to the meeting that they are all going to this night. So you playing with this sort of cartoonish image of witches riding brooms. Finally, the devil throws down his walking stick, gives it to Goody Cloyce, and the suggestion here is that she rides it to the meeting almost as if she would ride a broomstick. The devil makes a new walking stick and gives it to young Goodman Brown right here, and you get some more of this devil imagery. As they went, he plucked a branch of maple to serve for a walking stick, began to strip it of the twigs and little boughs, which were wet with evening dew. The moment his fingers touched them, they became strangely withered and dried up. So like the devil's hands are death, and they're withering anywhere he touches on this stick. And then you get the important scene right here. Let me find the paragraph. They continue to walk onward toward. Here we go. Here's the paragraph. Thus the pair proceeded at a good free pace until suddenly in a gloomy hollow of the road, Goodman Brown sat himself down on the stump of a tree and refused to go any farther. This is an important moment because young Goodman Brown is making the stand. He's saying, no, I'm not going to go any farther. I'm not going to go with you. I'm not going to go to this appointment I'm not going to go do this thing that we had agreed to do, which is later revealed in the story. Without more, and you will think better of this, the devil says, young Goodman Brown, friend, said he, my mind is made up. Not another step will I budge on this errand. What if a wretched old woman do choose to go to the devil when I thought she was going to heaven? And then the devil figure says, you will think better of this by and by, said his acquaintance. Sit here and rest yourself a while. When you feel like moving again, there is my staff to help you along. Without more words, he threw his companion the maple stick and was as speedily out of sight as if he had vanished into the deepening gloom. So young Goodman Brown is made to stand. The devil runs away. The devil says, look, you'll think better of this. You'll change your mind. But young Goodman Brown sits on the stump, makes this big moral stand, is like, nope, I'm not going any further. I'm good. I'm going to go home and be good. I'm going to go back to my faith. There's another interruption here, just like the Goody Cloyce interruption, where young Goodman Brown hears these horse hooves coming, and the deacon of his church and the minister of the church pass by. They are on their way to meet the devil too. So again, you get this, Hawthorne gives you this full satire where everybody who young Goodman Brown thinks are these good churchly people, they're on their way to meet the devil. And it is this sort of cumulative effect of the crumbling and falling apart of young Goodman Brown's faith. But he doesn't get up. He's staying on the stump. He's all good. He's sitting on the stump. He's committed to it. And to the point that he even says, right here, with heaven above and faith below, I will yet stand firm against the devil, cried young Goodman Brown. So he's still good. He's standing firm. He's not going back home, but he's not going forward. He's on the stump. He's all good. And then all of a sudden he hears these voices, almost like a chorus in the woods. The text says, aloft in the air, as if from the depths of the cloud, came a confused and doubtful sound of voices. And he hears this chorus, and it gets louder and louder and louder. Faith, shouted young Goodman Brown in a voice of agony and despair. The echoes of the forest mocked him, crying, faith, faith. The cry of grief, rage, and terror was yet piercing the night. And here's the important paragraph. Here's where the pink ribbons come back in. There was a scream, drowned immediately in a louder murmur of voices. The suggestion here is that's faith screaming. But something fluttered lightly down through the air, caught on the branch of a tree, and the young man seized it and beheld a pink ribbon. My faith is gone, cried he after one stupefied moment. There's no good on earth, and sin is but a name. And so right here he says, these are all just words. They don't have meaning. Come, devil, for to thee is this world given. This is the moment where young Goodman Brown turns, gives up on, for his physical life faith, he gives up on his religious faith and is like, I'm just going to go find my wife. You get this scene where he just goes running through the woods. It takes several paragraphs. Young Goodman Brown grasped his staff and set forth again at such a rate that he seemed to fly along the forest path rather than to walk or run. The road grew wilder and drearier, more faintly traced, and vanished at length. And so he's just like running, screaming through the woods, trying to find Faith now that he's found her ribbon and he's worried about her. He finally finds this, what is clearly designed to be a sort of like satire of Christian church congregation that is all met in the woods. Let's see if we can find that. In the interval of silence, he stole forward until the light glared full upon his eyes. At one extremity of an open space helmed in by the dark wall of the forest, there was a rock bearing some rude natural resemblance either to an altar where you might sacrifice somebody, or a pulpit where you'd have a sermon. There would be some form of like church service, surrounded by 4 blazing pines, their tops aflame, their stems untouched. So you get this like fire of hell imagery going here. So it's like this sort of inversion of Christian church, because you got the natural world, you got the instead of sacred, you've got the natural world, and then like the flaming trees too, with the suggestion of hell. So it's this sort of inversion of Christian church and Christian worship and sanctity. You get this description. There's this long paragraph here about everybody that's in the crowd here. It's all the people that young Goodman Brown will recognize from church, but also people in town who wouldn't be at church, and Native Americans, people who are not Christians. And so what you are getting is this sort of what Hawthorne is giving you here is this: everybody engages in some form of evil, and so everybody is a part of this congregation. Everybody has this sort of, or if you're the Puritans, you would say, well, everybody has darkness in their heart, so everybody is part of this congregation of like darkness or sin or something like that. And then that paragraph is broken up by, that paragraph is interrupted. Where is faith, thought young Goodman Brown, and as hope came into his heart, he trembled. The singing keeps up, and then the devil figure says, bring forth the converts, cried a voice that echoed through the fields and rolled into the forest. And they bring young Goodman Brown comes forward and is brought forward by the minister and Deacon Goodman. And then the person who turns out to be Faith is brought forward. Welcome, my children, said the dark figure, to the community, to the communion of your race. Again, this sort of inversion of Christian communion to this sort of almost like eating the fruit from the tree of knowledge. Now you know that everybody is dark and has sin in their heart. And once you know that, you're free to sin and be awful too. The communion of your race. You have found thus young your nature and your destiny. My children, look behind you. And that is the look and see that everybody's here, that everybody that you thought was good and holy and Christian, they're all just as bad as anybody else. They're all hypocrites. There, resumed the sable form, are all whom you have reverenced from youth. You deemed them holier than yourselves, shrank from your own sin, contrasting it with the lives of the righteousness. This night it shall be granted to you to know their secret deeds. Again, that sort of like tree of fruit from the tree of knowledge, the fall of man imagery, like you're going to know the truth about it. But again, just like what happens on the stump, young Goodman Brown holds back at the last second and says, the husband cast one look at his pale wife and Faith at him. What polluted wretches was the next glance show them to each other, shuddering at what they disclosed and what they saw. So they're about to like have this knowledge of the darkness of all human being and sort of original sin, that everybody is dark and has these dark impulses and everybody has the stain of sin on them. But then Goodman Brown says, Faith, Faith, cries the husband, look up to heaven and resist the wicked one. Whether Faith obeyed, he knew not. Hardly had he spoken when he found himself amid the calm night and solitude, listening to a roar of the wind, which died heavily away through the forest. And so just like in a flash, all of the congregation disappears, the whole scene disappears, and young Goodman Brown is alone in the forest. Even Faith isn't there. And the next morning, young Goodman Brown came slowly into the streets of Salem Village, staring around him like a bewildered man. This gives you this last little, this whether Faith obeyed him or not. It gives you these last few paragraphs of the story. This is the dystopian section, because the story says, the next to last paragraph, had Goodman Brown fallen asleep in the forest and only dreamed a wild dream of the witch meeting? The story gives you that next to last paragraph, the penultimate paragraph, if you want to use fancy language, and it asks you a question that it doesn't really care to answer. And the reason it doesn't really care to answer that question and doesn't really care for you to know whether it was real or not, and you can decide whether it was real or whether it was not, but the story doesn't care, because the effect it has on Goodman Brown is real. Whether it was real or not, Goodman Brown has changed. Be it so, if you will, but alas, it was a dream of evil omen for young Goodman Brown. A stern, a sad, a darkly meditative, distrustful, if not a desperate man did he become from the night of that fearful dream. And so his whole life is ruined. All he can do is see the sin and darkness in everybody. On the Sabbath day, when the congregation were singing the holy psalm, he couldn't listen. When the minister spoke from the pulpit with his hand on the Bible, then did young Goodman Brown turn pale. Often waking suddenly at midnight, he shrank from the bosom of his faith. So he's even lost faith in his faith. He's even lost the love and sort of faith in his wife. And at morning or eventide, when the family knelt down at prayer, he scowled. And when he had lived long and was borne to his grave, a hoary corpse, followed by faith, an aged woman, children and grandchildren, a goodly procession, they carved no hopeful verse upon his tombstone, for his dying hour was gloom. And so whether the dream was real or not, it has a real practical effect on young Goodman Brown, because he now has the knowledge his faith in humanity is gone. He has lost his faith in humanity, right down to and including his wife, and his perspective on human nature and on the goodness of human beings is ruined. And so everything, because of this perspective, like everything is darkness and gloom and hopelessness to him. This sort of true, this is the night where his life takes this dystopian, nightmarish turn into darkness and loss of faith and hopelessness. Hopefully that gives you both an introduction to a lot of the themes that Hawthorne is interested in, these sort of ideas about good and evil and how they make people act. Like if you believe that you might meet the devil walking through the woods, how that affects your perspective in your day-to-day life. And those are the themes that Hawthorne comes back to over and over again, is how people live out and act out their sort of beliefs, and whether they are hypocrites or whether they are able to act out their sort of ideas about goodness and decency and Christian morality. And you get a little bit of that in this story, in this one sort of nightmarish night for Goodman Brown, and how this one nightmare night turns the rest of his life into this dystopian nightmare. Hope that's helpful to you. Hope you're doing well. And I look forward to reading your work and hearing from you.